Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio World. Earth deserves more than a day. It has been an incredible week. So many panels, so many discussions. I think that this particular discussion coming up right now that is going to focus on health is a phenomenal way to wrap up 5 days of Earth Deserves More Than a Day. Your host is going to be Dr. Jeffrey Duchin, King County Health Officer, and I am going to turn it over to Dr. Duchin right now. I will do this one more time and welcome Dr. Jeffrey Duchin to who will be the host of this next particular discussion. Dr. Duchin.
Okay. Hello.
All right, we are having apparently a technical difficulty issue. I'm going to try to bring the panelists up right now. Let's see, is Dinah? Are you there, Dinah? Can you hear me, Dinah?
Yes, I can hear you. Although
Okay,
you're pretty low.
all of the panelists on. I think there's a problem with Dr. Duchin's microphone. Bradley, are you there, Bradley? Okay, Daaniya. Hello, Daaniya.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on today.
Okay, Mr. Bellis, let's bring everybody up.
Can you hear me?
Is here, and Paulina, can you hear
Can you hear me now?
your microphone, Paulina?
I am here.
Okay, then
But I can't. Can you hear me?
yes,
Yeah, Paulina, I can hear you.
yes.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I am going to be a sorry substitute for Dr. Duchin while we don't have his microphone working. But I think that you all know that this conversation is about environmental justice and public health. So I want to get started. Dr. Duchin, the first person that I brought on, can you tell us a little bit about your background? And let's start with that. Tell us a little bit about your background, Dinah.
That's right. Tony, are you referring to me? I can't hear you that well, unfortunately. Oh, are you all able to hear me okay?
Let's see. Okay, Daaniya, I know that we had heard you, Daaniya. Daaniya, can you hear me? Daaniya, can you hear me? Okay, and Paulina, Virginia listening to Rainier Avenue Radio. We're having this problem, but we're getting right now. Paulina, can you hear me, Paulina?
I can hear you, but very not loud at all. It's like it's hard to hear.
Okay. Paulina, we can hear you, and so I'm going to start this conversation by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. And we're going to end up talking today about health and environmental justice. So if you can start, Paulina, by giving us a little information on yourself, and then I'll try and move on to the other folks we're here with.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Tony, and good afternoon, everyone. I know there was some technical difficulties, but it's always wonderful to be surrounded by amazing people, and I am very grateful to be in this space. Thank you so much. My name is Paulina Lopez. I'm the executive director for an environmental justice organization in the South Seattle area called the Duwamish River Community Coalition. And I'm grateful to be here in this space. Most importantly, we have been in existence for more than 20 years doing environmental justice work when we were created, protecting the Superfund site and making sure that the people that are here in the community of the Duwamish Valley had a voice and is the people that are is deciding into how the cleanup should be done. So we came into being one of the first organizations that were starting to talk about environmental justice. And we have joined now by many, many others that are doing wonderful work. Our job is intersectional, so we have now, we couldn't talk about environmental justice unless we also bring the climate justice, bringing the people that have not traditionally be centered their voice into and the decisions that are happening in being made because of the impacts of climate change. So we have been involving our the Wamish Valley Youth Corps, which is a local youth program here in the environmental justice community that is South Park and Georgetown. This is our 10th anniversary for the youth corps. So we have been very engaged, well, intentionally trying to bring them to uh, all the changes that need to be happening and making these wonderful place that traditionally for years has been industrialized heavily and also that have lost that harmony that our Duwamish people, the first people of Seattle, how they live in harmony with Mother Earth. And so we have been trying to bring that this health equity and this awareness into how to connect better with our earth, better connect better with our water, and break this high discrepancy difference of life expectancy difference that we had with other communities in Seattle.
Thank you. Let's see. Daaniya is Iyaz, or I want to make sure Daaniya. Can you hear me, Daaniya?
Yeah. Hi, Tony. I'll go ahead and introduce myself if that's what you're asking. So, hi, everyone. My name is Daaniya Iyaz. I'm the Extreme Heat Mitigation Strategy Specialist in King County's Executive Climate Office, which is a relatively newer office focusing on different aspects of climate work in the county, ranging from reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to supporting and centering frontline communities that are particularly impacted by climate impacts, focusing on a green and just workforce development, and finally, climate preparedness, which is where most of my focus is on. So how can we help King County communities be more prepared and resilient when it comes to the impacts of climate change? And so my background is mostly in looking at the impacts of climate change on public health. So for my educational background, I was looking at the impacts of wildfire smoke on pediatric health at UW. And I've been at the county for a little over a year in this role. So I've been working on King County's first ever extreme heat mitigation strategy, along with my peers and colleagues at King County. And just for a bit of background on that, it's King County's first ever extreme heat mitigation strategy that's looking at not only how King County government, but our local partners, such as local jurisdictions and community organizations, can all collectively come together to mitigate the impacts of extreme heat on communities. As we recognize that this is a really pervasive issue that's becoming worse and worse, but not everybody experiences it the same way. So the idea is, how can we come up with a portfolio of solutions for people to become more resilient and prepared when it comes to the impacts of extreme heat? So thank you all for having me here. I'm really grateful to be sharing this space with other folks that are doing incredible work in the environmental justice and environmental health space.
Thank you. And we'll see if we have Dinah. Again, you're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio. All week we've been broadcasting in the interest of environmental justice. This is the first time that we've had this happen, but we're going to figure this out and work our way through it. So, Dinah, you should be able to hear me, Dinah. Is that Dinah? Can you hear me, Dinah Wilson?
Yes, thank you, Tony. And hello, everyone. I'm Dinah Wilson, and it's good to see you, Paulina. I've worked with Paulina around air pollution and climate justice. I previously worked at Puget Sound Clean Air Agency as the Equity Engagement Manager, and prior to that, I worked for many years at for the City of Kent, and that's how I got involved with the Climate Equity Community Task Force, which I also served on with Paulina. That group came together several years ago to be a part of the effort to write a strategic plan for climate. And we came up with a frontline communities section of the strategic plan. And frontline communities were really important. It's important that we centered those communities who are most disproportionately impacted by climate change, and to make sure that they come up with solutions and recommendations for their communities. So this group continues to meet. I continue to be a part of it, and what we do is we we're making sure that when we're talking about climate change, that we go to the very people who are most impacted by climate to make sure that uh, their priorities are considered. There are 8 priority areas in our plan that with respect to frontline communities, and we continue to work on those efforts. So it's just very good to be here with you, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Dinah. So, this conversation was going to be led by our King County Health Officer, uh, Deputy Duchin. Dr. Duchin is not on the line with us right now. And I know that the conversation was going to be regarding health. Uh, um, Dinah, you just mentioned climate equity and climate change. How does climate change, how do you connect that to folks individually, in particular in an urban environment where they see this as something that impacts them on their daily lives?
I heard my name, Tony, I think, but I couldn't hear your question. If someone on the panel heard that question, if you could repeat it to me, that would be helpful. Did anybody hear that?
No, it's very hard to hear you, Tony.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. The question was, how do you connect climate issues to folks who live in an urban environment that may not necessarily feel something that's impacting globally to what's going on that's impacting them directly related to climate change?
Right, that's a good question. Um, well, one of the reasons that we have, for example, the Climate Equity Community Task Force is that we know that um, people are really influenced by, valued members of their community whom they believe in and trust. And so a lot of those people, most of those people on that task force are connected to communities. In fact, that was one of the criteria for people to be a part of that task force, that you're not there just speaking for yourself, but you're really a part of a larger community, so that you can get, have the share those conversations with them, ask them to be a part of the training workshops that we have, the opportunities that we have for resources in the community, for ideas that come from the community, for participating in some of the green job training and the green jobs that are available. So you get people involved by making sure that people who are at that table, not only at the table of the task force, but at other tables, make sure that people are at that table who actually are part of the community so that we can make sure we have a direct link to people, not only just, making sure that, we're getting the information, but really having, for example, youth on that committee. Youth are so important in the climate change movement and they are so energized about it. We have students on that task force, and I know that Paulina talked about the youth that she's working with. So you really have to be directly uh, involved with community and make sure community is involved with the effort to get the word out. But we employ lots of strategies. For example, when we're talking about resources, community resources, uh, we make sure we have lots of ways to communicate, including social media, which young people, for example, really communicate via social media. A lot of us do. So we just use various means, but it's very important to make sure people that are directly impacted are part of the solution and the conversation, and that you're not doing things and imposing things on community, but community is directly involved.
I just want to piggyback on like this wonderful statement by Sister Dinah. Like we have been, hearing a lot, like nothing about us without us. And that's the statement that we always remain to say, for many, many of these initiatives in the past, the community wasn't at the center. And most importantly, the community that is impacted. So when we talk about climate justice, that is what we emphasize. How are the decisions being made without the community that is being directly impacted by
And Daaniya, as the extreme heat mitigation
time and a welcoming for all these communities that not necessarily only need the language to be brought up into different of these uh, cases, but also the understanding of it and how important it is to have them understanding, being part of the education and being part of the living experience that they bring, to make sure that they are being considered mainly in everything being planned around them.
and Daaniya, as the extreme heat mitigation strategy specialist. I mean, we had a couple of days, I think a couple of years ago, that were 112 degrees here, but those were just a couple of days. For you, please join in on this conversation, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Daaniya. And again, share with us how you communicate things that are happening globally and connect these to issues with people and how it affects them in their daily lives.
Yeah, thank you for the great question, Tony. I know what we've been seeing is as global temperatures are raising across the world, we are definitely seeing some local impacts here as well. And I think you're referring to the 2021 heat dome, which was pretty devastating occurrence for our area, especially because that's something that we're not really typically used to, because heat is the number one weather related cause for death in the United States. And we had 30 plus deaths that were directly attributed to heat during that 2021 heat wave in King County. And as someone that's lived here pretty much all my life, I feel like I can even notice the differences and the need for more and more cooling and the need for more and more air conditioning. And as we're looking at sort of future trends, we are expecting there to be more heat days on average for Western Washington during the summer, and also an increase in just general air temperatures in the Puget Sound area. And in terms of how we're seeing this manifest locally, we do know that there are a number of health issues that are associated with extreme heat. They can be heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. And we are noticing that from data from the University of Washington, they did find increased risk of hospital admissions as well as emergency medical services that are occurring during these extreme heat events. And if you do want to know more about that, I just wanted to mention that Public Health Seattle King County has a great dashboard that tracks the climate impacts on health, and you can see more statistics around heat-related illness there. So that's kingcounty.gov/climate and health/data. But one thing that we are noticing in our region is that it really doesn't impact people equally. We are noticing in our area kind of an urban heat island effect. And this is a phenomenon where areas that have more paved surfaces and less tree canopy and that are kind of more industrialized, like cities, have higher air temperatures than their surrounding countryside. And in King County in particular, we found that some of our urban areas were up to 20 degrees hotter than less urban areas during a heat wave. And as we're seeing more and more of this, there are definitely some solutions and strategies that we want to work towards, which is what we're hoping to capture by the extreme heat mitigation strategy. But just to kind of talk more about the impacts that we're seeing to answer your question about what we're seeing locally, we are also noticing that this doesn't impact people equally. So we're noticing that elderly people, children, pregnant people, and folks with chronic medical conditions, especially heart, lung, or kidney concerns, are definitely more vulnerable to heat-related illness. And some folks also face more risk because they're just exposed to heat more. And this could be people experiencing homelessness or people that work outside more. And we're seeing higher rates of hospitalization, heat stroke, and mortality within the folks that are just more exposed or more at risk to extreme heat. So we definitely recognize that heat does not impact people equally. And there are definitely some more areas in King County that we do want to focus on. And one thing I want to call out is South King County in particular. We're noticing when we did an analysis of mapped heat islands, we saw that some areas in King County have higher surface temperatures during extreme heat events, and they also have more paved surfaces and less urban tree canopy. So this also contributes to the heat of the area and also how people experience it. But I'll pause there.
Thank you. Again, this is Rainier Avenue Radio World. This is our discussion on health. This discussion originally going to be led by Dr. Duchin. We have a technical difficulty, so I'm not a specialist in this area, but y'all are, and you can certainly drive this conversation and talk about the things that you feel are important that people need to know. We've had a number of panel discussions on here already, but is Paulina still in with us?
I think she could only stay for half an hour. Did she leave? She might have left.
Okay. Um, I would like to talk about we've had discussions with the American Lung Association and a number of different organizations. The things that I heard from the American Lung Association and Dinah and Daaniya, you are free to take this wherever you want to take it. But the particles that I was told about and I listened to in the American Lung Association get into our lungs and they're microscopic and in some instances get into our bloodstreams and start to cause problems. And these are particles that we breathe on a daily basis that come from a number of different places, whether it's exhaust or water quality. Could either of you or both of you go into more detail about how the air we breathe, how the water we drink affects our health? Does it affect our health? Again, according to a person from the American Lung Association, the answer is despite the filtration, despite those things going on, yes. Can you give us a little bit more background on how that impacts and affects our health? And that's a question for both of you.
Yes, I'll start out, and Daaniya, you can pick up. Uh, Indeed, the air we breathe uh, affects our health. If we're not breathing clean air, if the air is dirty, because like you said, there's diesel. Most of the toxins that we breathe are from transportation sources. So diesel is a heavy source of that contributes to unclean air, and so you know we when we breathe in those particulate matter, the little small, it's so small, it's even smaller than the size if you would pull a strand of hair from your head. That is gets into our body and it affects our health. And particularly people with respiratory illnesses, it's exacerbated. For example, doing wildfire smoke. That's a source in the summertime, oftentimes, and sometimes even now in the late spring. If you're breathing that air, it impacts your ability to function. You think about people who have outside jobs and they have to continue to work when there's wildfire smoke that is getting into the air. Children are more vulnerable. People who have respiratory illnesses are more vulnerable. People with disabilities may be more vulnerable. So a lot of the people, like I said, that are a part of the very communities that people who look like us are often very vulnerable. People with diabetes and emphysema and asthma. We have a greater rate of asthma in our communities. So that impacts your ability to be able to function in a healthy society, to be able to live and work and to breathe safely. So it is very, very critical. When we look at it from this point of view, this perspective, we see how important it is to mitigate and control what's happening with our climate, because our very ability to indeed live depends on it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dinah. I think that was a really great overview of how people are particularly susceptible to these impacts. And two other things I wanted to add on is how climate change particularly impacts this. So I know Dinah was talking about wildfire smoke, for example, and I think that's a prime example of kind of how the climate impacts us and how the air that we breathe and what we kind of rely on can actually be damaging for our health. So like Dinah was saying, when it comes to wildfire smoke, for example, there are a lot of really small particulates there that can cause health issues ranging from headache to sore throat. But also, like Dinah was mentioning, people that have those underlying health conditions, like, for example, asthma or cardiovascular health conditions, that can really make those worse. And also, there is more data or research that's being done right now on longitudinal exposure. So the more and more that you are exposed to this, essentially, the more and more that could also cause adverse health reactions. And so this is definitely a long-term issue that more research is being done on right now. And one more tie that I also wanted to make is kind of this how history of racial injustice and kind of social and equitable injustice can exacerbate this. Since when we look at historic racial injustice, housing discrimination, and inequitable neighborhood investments, we can actually see the impact that it's having. And an example that I can give is through redlining, for example, which is a discriminatory practice that denied financial services based on race and ethnicity, especially for Black communities. And this practice ended up leading to disinvestment in minority communities. So now you see that some neighborhoods that are redlined may actually have exposure to greater levels of air pollution. And tying this back into extreme heat, some of these neighborhoods also have less tree canopy coverage and more paved surfaces. So I think this also underscores that our focus needs to be on some areas of the county versus others, and some may need kind of more solutions that are tailored towards what folks can access and what their environment looks like.
You know what I'm hearing, and then I'm gonna let y'all take this conversation somewhere else. But what I've been hearing over the course of this week are the connections between environmental justice and culture and race. Why is this an issue? If we all live on the same earth, if we all breathe the same air, we all drink the same water, why are we hearing about such specific, whether it's pesticides or whatever impacts that have to do with folks' culture or this word that we use called race? Why is that so prominent in environmental justice, or is those just the panels that we are hosting on this show?
Well, Tony, the truth of the matter is that we don't all breathe the same air. For example, uh, I think you've heard of that statement that zip codes do matter. Unfortunately, in our country, in our region, in our cities, zip codes do matter. You have to look at this from a historical perspective. Um, you know, and it's still happening. We don't even have to go back. You know, we don't have to look back 20 years, 50 years, or however many years we choose. We can look at this happening today. For example, last year there was a release of a study that showed that, the 10 most polluted areas in our nation. And some of those areas that were on the list 10, 15 years ago are still on the list today, because there was historical discrimination, racism, that impacted the decisions that were made. For example, where are we going to dump? Where are we going to dump our waste? Where are we going to put maybe a polluting plant? And there's been research to show that those decisions are intentionally made, based on people who don't have as much power or are perceived not to have as much power, people who might not vote, people who seem to have less of a voice. You can easily put a dump in an area, in a community where you feel as though people aren't going to protest or say anything. If you decide to put a dump or something like that in, say, Magnolia, where more wealthier people live and people have more political clout, then you're going to get pushback. People are going to be organized. People are able to get off work and go to the meeting, or they're able to go to the meeting in the evening because they maybe have someone who can take care of their children, or they have more means to be able to really say this will not stand. So we look at these historical impacts, the Duwamish work that Paulina is doing. The diesel trucks go through that area on a regular basis. It's near the airport. So those are two reasons that they have a lot of pollution in that area. Uh, just some things that were done over time, like the dredging of the Duwamish River, that has impacted the environment. So we're not the same. We're disproportionately impacted by these environmental impacts, because of historical discrimination. And yeah, I told you the example of redlining. That has an impact on us. If I live in a neighborhood and um, the policymakers decide not to put a park near my neighborhood, where are my children going to go to play? Where am I going to go to walk? Uh, it just matters, what's in the area where you live. It matters to how clean your area is and the opportunities that you have to get outside and, and enjoy yourself, and your children can go outside and not worry about, the air being smoggy or dirty. So, those are just some examples of why it does matter. And we have to look at this from an environmental justice perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dinah. And just to build off that, I think Dinah did an amazing job covering just kind of how these environmental stressors are more impactful definitely for communities of color. And one quick resource I wanted to share about that is the environmental health disparities map for Washington State. And just in case anyone's not familiar with it, or if you'd like to learn more about what Dinah was saying, it's an interactive mapping tool you can find on the Washington Department of Health website, which shows both environmental and health risks by census tracts, so you can identify disparities. So it takes into account risks like exposure and effects like pollution, as well as health and socioeconomic factors, like, for example, English proficiency or unaffordable housing. And if you look at that, you see that definitely a lot of these environmental health disparities are centered in communities of color as well as lower income communities. And interestingly, we found that environmental health disparities also line up quite prominently with where we see heat islands as well. So that's the environmental health disparities map from the Washington Department of Health. But one other thing I wanted to add is also looking at when we're talking about resources and solutions for climate stressors, or just in general, we have to just kind of look at who was designing them and who were kind of the architects behind this. Because one thing we've heard from community focus groups is that even if solutions are offered, they're not always accessible, they're not always culturally relevant, they're not always comfortable for these communities that are more disproportionately impacted. So even if you do have solutions that are being devised, it's really important to have community members that are on these front lines. They are representing their community perspective. Because just a couple of things that we've heard is, even if there are cooling locations, for example, for extreme heat, people may feel stigmatized and discriminated against. even if there are green spaces, for example, sometimes thinking about the transportation when you're there, thinking about the kind of programming that's available, thinking about park safety. It doesn't always take into account just what the needs are of different communities. And that's a huge thing we see in messaging in particular. So even if you are to put some messaging out there about what are some climate change issues, what are the impacts on your health, are these in multilingual formats? Are these in formats where people find them useful? So for example, we've heard a lot about video formats or even using messaging apps like WhatsApp. We've also heard about the need for trusted messengers, just because a lot of communities have been harmed by these greater systems, especially white supremacy. So sometimes a lot of them can have distrust of government. So a lot of that is finding community partnerships and seeing, well, how can we co-develop these messages to ensure that they are reaching folks that are primarily impacted, and also that it's coming from a trusted messenger. Because even if we are devising solutions, it's really important that, again, they're being made in an accessible way, and they're also being developed by community. So it's like Paulina was saying earlier, it's making sure that the solutions are by community for community.
Again, you're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio, and I'm so happy to have our guests, Dinah Wilson and Daaniya Iyaz. I hope I'm saying that correctly, Daaniya. And this is a panel on health of the most prolific introduced by Dr. Kramer. We had some technical difficulties, and so I'm standing in. Dinah and Daaniya, I'm asking you questions based off of information that I received over the course of these last 5 days of Earth Deserves More Than a Day. We've had some amazing panelists, including we've heard from the Black Farmers Collective, we've heard from the YMCA's Earth Service Corps, and we also heard about resiliency hubs. We've talked to women of wisdom from Tri-Cities who shared with us some responsibilities of immunization for urban solutions where they have a nuclear plant over there, for example. Urban League, we talked about the Transit Providers Union and transportation sector, and more and more and more. What I want to do right now, and the reason why I'm saying all that is I want to give both of you an opportunity to reflect and talk about and discuss with us or even share with each other a couple of the issues that you think in regards to health are important that we create awareness about, that we discuss, that we talk about right now. And I know there are a number of them, but if you could just pick out a couple and without my prompting, because you're the experts, what should we be aware of? What should we be concerned about? And is there also some good news that goes along with environmental justice? And Dinah, I'm just going to start with you just because that's what we do here.
I think you're asking, Tony, what would we say that people should be aware of? Um, and if that's the case, one thing that kind of sounds simple, but I think is impactful, um, that comes to mind is people should be aware that the climate change movement is for everybody. It's not, it has been a movement that has been uh, primarily led by white people, and it's gratifying to see that people of color are coming, BIPOC people are coming to be a part of the movement, and that, as we are saying, nothing for us without us. So it's so important for people to find entries of involvement, pathways to involvement. Um, and they could be something as small or as simple as, you know, finding out a group that's working in your community, like Paulina's group, for example, or starting a group in your community. For example, you can uh, check out air monitors. You can, where you could test and see what the air is like in your community. Puget Sound Clean Air Agency has a lending library, for example, and you determine that maybe the air is not what it should be, and you decide that you want to do some mitigation strategies. But one thing I would do is just encourage people to pay attention to what's happening, around them and decisions that are being made around climate issues, and become a part of the movement. Get involved. Um, when these impacts are, really treading on us the greatest, we need to be a part of that conversation, and we need to be pushing and advocating for change and things that work for our communities. And making sure that policies that are being set, making sure that communication strategies, all these things that we've mentioned, that we're at, that they're centering frontline communities. I think it's also important to follow, what's happening. For those of us who are interested in some, sort of the policy side of things, follow what, some of the things that are happening with the legislature around, climate legislation, and make sure you weigh in. I think there's something will be on the ballot concerning climate. So pay attention to anything you see on your ballot and vote. It's important to vote. I know that's something that we hear all the time, and sometimes we get tired of that. What does it matter for me to vote? But if you want people to center climate issues, prioritize climate issues, it's important to elect people who really understand the importance of resources and making sure that some of the things that we're doing, that we mitigate or stop those processes that are negatively impacting the air we breathe, the water we drink, etc. So those are just a couple of things I really encourage people to get involved. And like I said earlier, it's so gratifying to see that youth are so involved. I've gone out and given lots of presentations and talks with youth, and they are so engaged, so interested in this topic, and so smart and knowledgeable about it. So that is something that is very promising for our future.
Yeah. Thanks, Dinah. I know that was very amazing, comprehensive, and I'll try to add on, I feel like that covered a lot. So in terms of what I think is an important message is just definitely centering that climate change is here and happening now, just because sometimes I know it can feel like a further off event, but something that we are seeing is when it comes to heat and wildfire smoke, for example, people may not recognize that they are at risk. So one thing that I think is really important is just kind of, like Dinah was saying earlier, being aware and recognizing how things have an impact, and also how different systems come together to have an impact. And just being more aware and informed of the personal health risks that may come out of this. And one, I guess, other resources that I'd want to highlight is just also knowing where to find help and where to find resources. Since one thing that I've been really grateful for in this position is connecting with so many organizations that are doing great work around providing resources, whether it's around air quality, whether it's around making improvements to housing, whether it's around different resources to helping people stay cool. So I think what I wanted to do is maybe just share a couple of resources that would be helpful for people. And starting with air quality and wildfire smoke, like Dinah was mentioning, you can check the air quality on fire.airnow.gov. You can also sign up for some King County alerts for air quality. So that's kingcounty.gov/alerts. And there's also a page on Public Health Seattle King County around wildfire smoke preparedness. If you look that up, it'll give you some resources on what you can be doing to stay safe during periods of extreme heat. There's another webpage on Public Health Seattle King County that's got some hot weather preparedness. And King County agencies are also releasing 2 new strategies later this year, one around wildfire smoke safety and one around extreme heat mitigation safety. So more information will be up on those shortly when they are released. But I think just being aware of these resources that are out there to support people. And one more thing that I really appreciated that Dinah was mentioning is how youth and community members are really involved. One thing I've really loved hearing when in all of our different community engagement efforts and things that I see in my own community is just members coming together to support each other. So whether it's youth coming to help support adults, whether it's elder adults sharing their stories about what they've been through and their experiences and their wisdom, I think just that intergenerational support and sharing has been something that I've really been appreciative of and something I'm appreciative of in my own life. So I think just kind of spending more time around community members, and maybe either whether it's joining organizations, maybe whether it's connecting with groups and people you're already with in your own life. I feel that that community aspect has just been so strong, and I've seen so much resilience there to climate, and also some of the other corresponding health impacts and just other concerns that come with it. So that is what I'll add there.
You're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio. My guests, Dinah Wilson and Daaniya. A couple of things that we know recently that we've heard about are the bad water in Flint, Michigan. Then we know that there was a train that derailed in Ohio and apparently has caused a tremendous amount of toxic trouble in that area. These are things that what I call industrial polluters. And we've highly focused on localized and what people can do and what's impacting us. What can be done? Because I've heard this phrase that it is a few that are causing this problem for many. Is that true? And tell me about industrial, what I'm calling industrial polluters, and why we're in this position today and what we can do about. Again, we have the industrial revolution, which was amazing in a lot of ways for folks to move around to make life easier. But now there's this action afterwards in hindsight. Talk a little bit about industrial polluters and what can be done and where we're going in that regard.
Well, I know that, for example, the Sound Clean Air Agency uh, regulates uh, the main polluters as far as air pollution is concerned. They, are responsible for that. So, you can find out information, for example, where the main polluters are in your community. And if you know that a new industry is coming to your community, I think it's important to know if, for example, is this is it a so-called more green industry? And just be involved in, what's being brought to your community and how you can maybe advocate around not adding something to the community where there are already a lot of pollutants in your community, that that industry should be spread around, and industry should be sited in places where you don't where not in residential areas, for example, or not close to residential areas where people live and breathe the air and drink the water. So I think, just being aware and getting involved in what's happening is important. But those big polluters are, regulated. But, it's important to, if you're seeing something, smelling something, it's important to report that. And you can go on line at Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, and you can find out where you can report that, for example, uh, to make sure that the regulations are being followed. So those are some things I would suggest. I'm by far no expert on industrial pollution, but those are some suggestions I would have.
Yeah, thanks, Dinah. In terms of industrial pollutants, also not an expert. And I think Dinah did a great job covering the individual things that can be done. So just awareness and advocacy on your end, and then, like Dinah was saying, being informed of any new developments or any potential legislation that comes through related to climate and pollution. The other piece that I'll mention is kind of on the more systemic end. One thing I know that we're working on at King County is looking at decarbonization and seeing how we can just reduce pollutants and kind of work maybe more towards electrification. So an example would be through the different greenhouse gas reduction targets that we have, as well as reimagining some waste management, also decarbonization of government operations through electrifying our bus fleets. That's one example. But the idea is that I think there are things that we can be doing on a systemic level, and also we can be supporting this again through the green workforce and the green economy. So it's kind of how can we set ourselves up to make a more just transition towards more electrified and less harmful ways of operating. And I think that's something that my other colleagues are working on. So they can probably give more detail, and you can find more information on King County web pages. But I think it's really, really important to, again, while recognizing that pollutants are, or there are certain industrial processes that do these pollutants, kind of reimagining how exactly can we have a better system in the future. And again, bringing in these different community members as we're designing what these systems could look like. Because again, it's going to be a countywide effort, especially since when it comes to economy, when it comes to industry, this affects everyone that's living in the area. So it's just, how can we work together towards a more just transition there?
You are listening to Rainier Avenue Radio, and our broadcast of Earth Deserves More Than a Day. We've been doing this since Monday. Actually, we started on Saturday by live broadcasting from the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle's Black Earth Day. And so we've been going at this for about a week, but certainly Earth deserves more than one day. I'd like to give Dinah and Daaniya the opportunity for final comments, and then we'll give thanks to King County Parks as a sponsor, and we'll play that little short for them. And then I'm going to have Darnell and Russell join me up here to say goodbye. But before we do all of that, I certainly want to give Dinah and Daaniya the opportunity for final words to share any messages that they'd like to share with our communities who are listening or who will be listening. Dinah, would you like to start with your personal message to our community?
Thank you so much, Tony. It was great being with you today, and great being with your audience. It's always good to have an opportunity to talk about something that affects us in our community, and just encourage you to continue the conversation and to learn more. Find some of those resources that Daaniya referred you to, and make sure that people who don't have access to that, may not have computer or whatever, may not be computer savvy, you know, make sure you get the information to people in your community. Pay a lot of attention to seniors, for example, when things are happening with regard to wildfire smoke. Check on your neighbors, make sure people are safe, and they can get to the warming centers that were mentioned, for example, and just get involved and keep this conversation going. I mean, when you talk to people in your neighborhood, in your community, you have a huge impact. More so than hearing from us, or sometimes policymakers. Just talking to people in the neighborhood about things, and making sure people are aware is really, really important. So, looking forward to hopefully being with you in the future, and thank you so much for your time today. And
Dinah and Daaniya, the same opportunity for you to share final words, final messages, at least for this particular panel discussion with our audience who are listening. Some of them are watching and listening. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted to thank you all for this time in the space. Thank you, Tony, for facilitating. And Dinah, I know Paulina is off now, but just wanted to thank you both so much. It is definitely a great honor sharing the space with you all, and I always learn so much, so I appreciate it. I would say similarly, I just knowing that the climate movement, or knowing more about climate change, it really is for everyone. So whether it's starting with a conversation, whether it's wanting to be more active in your community, I think just it's really important to stay engaged and realize that, yes, your voice matters, because I have learned so much from just being in the same room as other folks or talking to them. So I think that is really, really important. And if they're kind of being plugged in with some of the resources I mentioned could be helpful. But like Dinah was saying, I know it's not always accessible for all. So just kind of staying plugged in with any community. If there are ways, just asking for help or clarification when you need it, that's definitely a huge one, since we recognize that it's important to involve everybody when it comes to a lot of our climate work. So just wanted to thank you all so much for your time and space, and I look forward to staying involved on this. So appreciate it.
Thank you both. Um, we're gonna wrap this up. If you have to go, you can go. But we're gonna show a quick clip from King County Park, who um, we are very thankful who sponsored this opportunity for us to be able to share all of this amazing information from folks like you during this particular week. So let's go ahead and play the King County Parks.
King County Parks and Recreation, and we are partnering with Rainier Avenue Radio on their Earth Deserves More Than a Day programming. And we want to hear from you about our next Parks Levy. King County Parks will be at Columbia Cedar Theater over the next week. Tune in and drop by and tell us what you think about what's most important to you in terms of outdoor recreation and access. And take the survey, which ends by April 29th. We look forward to hearing your thoughts about what's most important to you. Let's all come together and make every day Earth Day.
All right. 5 days. Earth deserves more than a day. This is something that we were all vested in making sure happened, and now we're almost done. Everything except the goodbye. So, Mr. Wilson, um, your thoughts on what you've experienced over the course, actually, of the last month that led up to this 5 days of hearing about environmental justice.
Well, it's been going on for 5 days, but like I said, over the past month, I've gathered or walked away and retained a wealth of a lot. And I advise folks to revisit some of these panelists and videos that we have online and get involved. A lot of information out there will inform you and make things more impactful.
All right, Charlie Darnell.
Yeah, as we both said, it's been going on for 5 days, but we've been working on it for a lot longer than that. I think the thing that I would hope the audience takes away from this, and I definitely took away from this, is a sense of comfort in knowing there are passionate people working towards feel safe and the work that they do.
Thank you. Sure.
I would like to, in this case, well, I would like to thank Tony. I had not before, probably won't now, hear a term. Earth deserves more than a day. I want to give a shout out to this guy throughout the game. And that's not just because he's my friend, he does good work. And so I owe him more of that. So here we go. Amen.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, Earth does deserve more than a day, and in particular when these are issues that are impacting our communities, and it's happening over a period of time and gradually. So you may not be aware that you're being impacted by pesticides, by toxins, by all these things, by these particles that are getting in your lungs. And so this is just an opportunity to make folks aware. I definitely would like to thank all the people who were involved in participating with this, including in Weezer Consulting, uh, the Winds of Change Alliance, certainly the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, the Black Farmers Collective, YMCA Earth Service Corps. Thank you for bringing youth voices into this. Then the Resilience Hub, again, that was Nancy Weezer. Um, Communities of Conscience, Efforts to Protect Communities of Color. That was also a great panel. Thank you, John Yasutaki. Stephanie Ung was the co-executive director of the MERD community of Seattle, King County, and James King, the Black Farmers Collective, the Circular Economy Business Park. And just really quickly, I'm going to have Charlie describe this, because you may hear this term, Circular Economy Business Park. What are we talking about with Quest?
Yeah. Before I begin, I would like to say that panel, that lecture presentation, was a lot more general than just the Circular Economy Business Park, which is a area in which objects and materials that would normally go into our waste stream can be modified, put back into our commodity stream, and go to a reuse facility where people can buy it. But I think that conversation is much more about how do we salvage what we're throwing away, how do we reuse and disassemble instead of damage or destroy. I thought that was a great day.
Kathleen and Timothy, and then also the Women of Wisdom from Tri-Cities. What another amazing panel sharing Eastern Washington community-based environmental solutions. They also talked about the Hanford nuclear facility, and that means nuclear waste, and that has contributed a great deal to the land and the water in that area. And thank you, Shanae Fitzgerald, founder and CEO of Women of Wisdom in Tri-Cities. Then also the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, and Nick Jeffries and Neil. Thank you so much for your participation. The Transit Riders Union discussed the transportation levy, and that was a really interesting panel. And we're talking about money. And so transportation justice, there's so many things that fall under the term of environmental justice. Communities and clean water. We heard more about that today as well. The water that we drink, led by Mary Rayburn, a communications at King County Stormwater Service Specialist. Thank you to William Herbert and Parker Linus for contributing as well. The American Lung Association, Executive Director of the Seattle American Lung Association, Susan Oatman, and I learned so much from that one about our air and water quality. Again, the Winds of Change Alliance presented Equal Cultural Systems Barriers and Access panelists Jeffrey Thomas and Jonathan Halliday not only talked about their roots as Muckleshoot elders, but we were also treated to music, which was amazing in itself. Drums and at least I'm calling it a flute. It sounded like a woodwind. The Executive Climate Equity Team. Again, I'll let Charlie tell you about the King County Executive Climate Equity Team.
A lot of people with a lot of optimism about our country, and people that really want you to get involved in the work that we're doing. A lot of that lecture ended up being dream jobs. I think they stressed a lot how young people and people that don't feel like they're included in environmental justice to do the work.
And then came today. We started off today with the Washington State Department of Ecology and Lizzie Baskerville. It's wonderful information that she shared with us. And make sure and check that out. And, I'm just going to point out one thing again about what Lizzie said. If you are a black woman and you go to get your hair done, you're exposing yourself to a lot of different chemicals that can harm you. If you are putting on makeup, found that out, I didn't know that. Then again, you are putting chemicals on your body that are not healthy for you. Just simply anyone putting on makeup. And so go back and take a listen to the Department of Ecology lecture that Lizzie did. Just a wealth of information there. And then we heard from Professor Warren Jeffries, who did not hold back on his opinions and his thoughts. I highly recommend you listen to that particular lecture as well. And we're going to end this up with a health discussion that was going to be led by Dr. Jeffrey Duchin, and we had some technical difficulties. But thank you to Dinah and Daaniya, who hung in there with us, and Paulina for a while. And we got some information out, and I think that was also very valuable information to the both of them. And thank you, Jeffrey, for putting that panel together. Boy, that's just about it. And here we are. Thank both of you for all the work that you've done on behalf of our community. There are a lot of folks out there who appreciate it and who have contacted us and said, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of this. Well, Earth deserves more than 5 days. And so environmental justice will be continued on our platform here at Rainier Avenue Radio as something that we ensure information gets out from folks, and then your voices are heard as well. And, the same thing we're going to do with generational wealth. And we also will continue to ensure that in this upcoming political season, that we bring the voices of folks who are running for office who need your vote and bring them to the stage, and we do interviews and we do debates and hold them accountable so that you can become informed voters. Those are just a few of the things that we do here at Rainier Avenue Radio.world. We've got AAPI month upcoming. You'll be able to hear stories on this radio station. We'll also have a few artifacts in this building that you'll be able to come to see at no cost to you. Then we'll be doing our Make Music Day on June 21st, and we'll get you more information about that. We'll be looking to make music all over the city. We are your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Thank you for joining us this week for Earth Deserves More Than a Day. Thank you to King County Parks, who understood and knows the value. And I'm happy that we were aligned in our efforts to create awareness for environmental justice. It's me, Tony B, and half of our staff, everyone behind the scenes, Mr. Daniel Bellis, Tyrone, who helped put this together and made this thing work this week. Thank you so much. And I guess in closing, I'm just going to say, remember, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you cannot, you're probably right.